to give a very warm welcome to Guy Bisson from Ampere Analysis.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Very happy to be back in Canada for another year. So I've been asked today to look at the streaming landscape and really the competitive environment that is being set up out there, and in particular to answer one specific question. And that question is, now that streamers are so focused on actually making money, are they stronger competition to local broadcasters? And the answer is yes, they are. So I could end there, but it's probably quite useful if we run through why they're going to be stronger competition and how they're going to be stronger competition, because that, of course, allows one to prepare and compete on equal terms. So let's take a step back and ask ourselves how we got to this position. Streamers were going great guns. They were signing up subscribers all over the place, all over the world, lots of headroom for growth in multiple wealthy markets, and everybody was happy. And then suddenly, back in 2022, there was a bit of a shock to the market, and that shock was Netflix losing more than 1 million customers in a single quarter. That was the first sign that severe saturation effects in the biggest and wealthiest markets were starting to take effect, and that led to Wall Street and other investors beginning to question the whole business model of streaming, and that business model, of course, by now, having been adopted by all of the major studios as the key to their future. So the business model came under question, and there was a twofold response. If we can get the slides to move, we can start to talk about that. There we go. And the twofold response was firstly to cut staff, and secondly to cut content costs. So the two big cost centers of the streaming business facing severe cutbacks. And then there was the examination of the whole business model, which had been focused on subscription, and suddenly advertising was attractive. And again, the customer focus shifted as well from customer acquisition to one of keeping customers on platform. At the end of 2023, this clicker is very unresponsive. Technical person, if you could maybe do something. Hello? Okay. So that led me to put out a report at the end of last year that said all of the streamers, when I looked at their business and I looked at the cuts they'd made, all of the streamers are going to be profitable in 18 months' time, so you'd better prepare for it. And this is one of the most significant trolling situations I have ever faced. Not only did the media question that conclusion, and I was getting phone calls asking me if I stood by that claim, but other analysts were trolling me on LinkedIn and other platforms, saying, what an idiot. Now we fast forward just 6 months, and we've had Disney come out talking about a profit, Warner come out talking about a streaming profit, Peacock saying they're on course, and Paramount also setting the scene. So it doesn't look so ridiculous now, but it does change the competitive dynamic. So we have moved to a world of new world streaming where the priorities have changed. We've gone from subscriber acquisition at all costs to retention at all costs. Who cares about profit? To we must make some money. Big budget content that's great for acquiring new customers is no longer the main driver. Lower cost repeat viewing, now that we have advertising, is becoming more important, and it's more important for retention. We didn't have to worry about cost or debt 5 years ago. We most certainly do now. And of course, we've gone from advertising is for losers to we all love advertising. And this has created a cycle of interrelated change. So we've started off with saturation effects, led to cost cutting, led to business diversification. But it also led to certain factors that one might consider would reduce the competitive advantage of streamers, and that is lower production investment and a re-examining of licensed content over original production. Customer retention has become key. Advertising is accelerating all those shifts as we begin to prioritize that repeat viewing. So let's run through some of those trends. Firstly, let's look at content spend. And what we will see, if the graph ever wants to come on screen, there we go, content spend is flat. So we've been in a period of what we referred to as peak TV. We're now referring to the end of peak TV. And you can see from those lines, which show the change year on year in spend, that we've flattened out. And we're not forecasting particularly strong increase in investment. Notice, though, that licensing has risen above original in terms of the growth of the spend. So we have got that dynamic going on as well. Streamers are still increasing spend, but hardly. And you can see again from the line that we're down at 2 to 3% increase in investment. And that, of course, has impacted the content flow. So if we look at commissioning of new original content by the major 6 global streamers, you can see that it began to decline rapidly in 2022, so the first half of 2022. This is nothing to do with the writers' strike, which came later. This is a pullback in investment by all of the majors. You can see that we've got a bit of an upswing from Netflix and Amazon in the last quarter. So there are green shoots of change and coming back to some increase in investment. But as I said from the previous graph, growth is going to be relatively flat. Again, nominally then, they should be less competitive, not more competitive. So how can that second slide, where I said, yes, they're going to be more, possibly be correct? Well, firstly, of course, we've got the move into advertising. At one level, that provided a boost to customer growth. So we began to see customers who had avoided streaming come online, and we've got a little blip there in our downward trajectory of growth when those advertising tiers really began to get off the ground last year and this year. But as you can see, that impact on growth is relatively temporary. The real impact, of course, is in revenue. So if we look at the global streaming market, including our forecasts out to 2029, you can see that we've got a global market worth around $170 billion. If we then think about what advertising is going to do to that growth trajectory, it's going to add, we think, about $42 billion in growth that would not have existed had the streamers not launched advertising. And remember that we are in a situation where the streamers now are beginning to become profitable. They have launched an additional business line that is boosting otherwise slow growth, that will return them to growth. And they are attracting a customer base that they had hitherto been unable to reach. In addition, and very important in this business, which lives month to month in terms of customer relationships, is that they have a churn protection mechanism in place. So if we look at Canadian households who are currently being attracted to ad-supported streaming, we can see that they're focused on a particular subset of the population. So from our consumer data, we can see clearly that at the moment they're skewing younger. They're 20% more likely to be under 44 and nearly 30% to be under 24. They are actually lower income, so it is attracting those households that might have been more cost conscious for some of the streaming platforms hitherto. And it's a household makeup in which it's a shared space. So either families with younger children or young adults living in multi-occupancy situations. But the key point is that it's broadening the reach and interest level for streaming across the population. The other thing, of course, that's been going on is that we are starting to see bundling of streaming services, which again changes the competitive dynamic. And again, I put out a report just before the pandemic saying bundling has to be the next logical step for streamers. And of course, it didn't happen because the pandemic offered a protection. It caused a situation of so-called carry forward, where customer growth that would have occurred over the 2 years forward jumped back into this concentrated period. And streamers didn't need at that time to take extra measures to grow the customer base. The pandemic and everyone stuck at home did it for them. So there was a 2-year delay before they really jumped on the bundling bandwagon after the pandemic. There is, of course, one exception, and that is Netflix, who have said we're not going to bundle with other streamers. And that is because of their first mover advantage and their very unique position as the base streaming service within the household. But again, why does bundling make sense? And by the way, advertising actually enables bundling because there's more cost flexibility in terms of the tier level that you include within that bundle. So we're not generally talking about the premium levels being bundled at low cost. We're talking about the ad tier bundles. And it's very powerful because if we look at the content interest of a traditional nuclear family, and I've done that through our consumer data again, this is a female 35 to 44, and the way that she would skew in terms of content interest. And what we're aiming to do is fill our circle. Because if you fill the circle, you've got more people to complain about cutting the cord and dropping the subscription. So we add in a male of the same age, and we can see that that begins to complete that circle in terms of the genre interest. And if we add in one more, which is a household with a child, obviously that starts to skew towards children and a few other genres. So we've filled our circle, and by having a bundle that fulfills all of those content desires, the impetus to drop it, you only need one person in the household to complain, and you're going to keep that service. Advertising then changes everything, not only the ability to bundle, but streamers want a longer customer life cycle and greater regularity of viewing. So it's not about the burst that brings the customers on to watch a box set in 48 hours. It's about keeping them watching week to week to week to week. So we're seeing more staggered drops, and you'll have seen this in your own viewing, more broadcast-like behavior. No box sets, you have to wait each week to get the next episode. And we're actually seeing, therefore, that that is creating more competition with the broadcast and linear type environment. So majority of streamers, with the exception of Netflix, always the exception, are now staggering the drop of their original TV series, as you can see from this chart. We've also seen a shift in the economics of content investment. So again, those big, expensive series, yes, they still have their place, but the economics of using very high volume just for retention, very high value, just for retention, don't add up anymore. So you move to lower cost programming and a lot more unscripted reality entertainment documentary. 1 in 2 now are unscripted compared to 1 in 4, 5 or 6 years ago. We're also seeing a change in scripted content, so less of the high-budget sci-fi, action, adventure type TV shows and more of the crime and comedy and romance, which is lower cost and again broader spectrum in terms of audience engagement. So my thesis then is that cutbacks and a move to profitability are not about a pullback from competition, but about a strategic convergence, because suddenly the audience is broadening, the appeal is broadening, the ability to buy into streaming is broadening and becoming more accessible. And the type of programming and the way it is presented and dropped and served to the end viewer is becoming more TV-like, if you like, if we make the distinction between TV and streaming. Now, the final difference, as we're talking about advertising, is the way that streamers are able to experiment and manipulate the advertising environment. If we think again about broadcast or linear TV, it's a very set way that advertising is served to viewers in a set number of ad breaks that last a set number of time for 30-second slots. This is from a brand new service we're launching, our advertising analytics product. The US data at the moment, I'm afraid we don't quite have Canada, but what it shows you is that the ad load on streaming, of course, is considerably lower at the moment than it is for linear television, particularly for players like Netflix. So these are ads per hour, each one being a 30-second on average slot. So 18 ad slots is 9 minutes. We're also seeing them experiment with the way that they position ads in the programming. So this is about user experience and keeping engagement at a greater level throughout the hour of viewing. Pre-rolls, especially for services that are heavy on movies, are becoming key. So up to 25% of max ads are shoved in a pre-roll, and then less interruption, of course, to the programming. They're also showing experimentation with ad length, particularly in that pre-roll slot, so 15-second slots instead of 30-second slots for several of the streamers. At the moment, it seems that the advertisers, the brands, are more comfortable with some of the big studios. And some of those big studios, like Paramount, whose parentage, of course, is Viacom CBS, who have had a long heritage in ad-supported linear television. They are attracting a much broader range of advertisers and brands than, for example, Netflix at the moment. Now, that is partly an effect of the ad load, of course, which is much higher on Paramount and Hulu than Netflix. But nonetheless, it seems that advertisers are buying in to those traditional players who they've been dealing with through their linear properties for the past 30 or 40 years. One more slide coming up, and then there's going to be a QR code for anyone who wants to download the slides. So the other thing, of course, that streamers can do is target advertising to different demographics and different viewers very easily and effectively. And this just shows a selection of brands that one might consider demographically skewed and how they are being targeted by Hulu to either a male viewing profile or a female viewing profile. And you can see that there is very distinct targeting of those specific brands. What we're seeing in the initial data is that around half the ads served on streaming are targeted to everyone, to both genders. So they're about the brand building, the mass reach. And then the other half are targeted to maybe a male or a female or a younger or an older demographic. And there's also a large amount of local advertising being used by streamers. So they're also cracking into that market where New York-specific brands or California-specific supermarket brands are significant advertisers within the postcode that those adverts are being served within. So targeting is another advantage, potentially, that streamers have over broadcast. And it's for these reasons, along with all those content shifts, that I argue streamers are more competitive now that they are focused and now that their strategies have altered towards profitability. And with that, if anyone does want the slides, please scan the QR code and you'll be sent them immediately. Otherwise, I'll say thank you very much, and I'm out of time anyway. Thank you.